Joining me now are two voting rights activists. Mark Morial is the president and CEO of the National Urban League, and LaTosha Brown is the co-founder of Black Voters Matter. And I'm incredibly proud to have you here on this day that we are all marking in history. LaTosha, I'll start with you. You have been on the forefront of the current efforts to protect the right to vote. As I said, the 14th and 15th Amendment, it's in the Constitution. Just look it up. We all have this right. But as we sit here 56 years later, after the Voting Rights Act, which was necessary to essentially make sure the Constitution was implemented and enforced, should we be feeling the same sense of urgency that those activists felt in 1965?
Absolutely. You know, Zerlina, I am a native of Selma, Alabama. I grew up in Selma, Alabama. I knew Amelia Boynton personally. She and Marie Foster and others in that area, I considered them in many ways as mentors and instructors of what we're doing now. And the fact that this is 56 years later, and we're still at this point, we're at this point where, as Reverend Barbara said, you know, we have less voting rights is actually indicative of where we are as a nation. You know, how long are we going to have to continue to have this conversation around if we're going to make democracy be real, or if it's just going to be a propaganda piece? You know, the fact of the matter is, in Lyndon Johnson, there were a couple of things I just want to note around that. And one, you know, President Johnson had to be forced. Yes, it was because of the pressure that was happening on the ground that actually forced him to sign it, because there's an error in this country that Black people should always wait. Let's just wait until we get this passed first. You know, now in many ways we're hearing that same echo chamber of, oh, it's the infrastructure bill. Let's just wait. And what we're saying is we've waited. We've waited over 400 years. We've waited for the last 56 years for at least the intention of the Voting Rights Act to really have some permanence. Instead, it has been stripped, and we have now, on this date, we have less. And so we have less voting rights. So I think there's a number of things that we have to really be mindful around. One, you know, the Senate is supposed to recess coming up this week. There should be no recess. And if we're talking about fundamental voting rights for this country, and we're talking about the undermining of democracy, that should be the key and central issue. So one, the Senate should not recess. Two, the president, we need to see more leadership from Biden. What we have not been seeing is the same kind of leadership for Biden. If you go back into really what Johnson did, Johnson actually brought a joint session together, right? And he actually pushed and he used all the power of his office as president to force. So literally, I know that there's a stone wall of people that are in Republicans that are in the Senate right now, but they couldn't possibly be that much more difficult than what Johnson was up against in 1965. So the point is, the president has not only a bully pulpit, but he has a tremendous amount of power of literally rallying and making sure that he sends the message that this is a key and critical issue in terms of moving forward.
So how would he send that message, LaTosha? Like, what do you, so say tomorrow he says, okay, I heard your message on Zerlina's show and I'm going to do it. What do you want him to do? Like, starting tomorrow, what can he do?
You know, the first thing I want him to do is I want him to ask for the recess to not to end. I want him to send a message just like he did with the infrastructure to say, we are not going to leave until this gets done. And that he actually has a tremendous amount of power. He is the leader of the party, a tremendous amount of power to really be able to send that message. Secondly, he needs to meet with the Texas has just, while the Texas delegation are literally going back, the governor has just called another session that starts tomorrow with the explicit purpose of really undermining voting rights. And so that I think that there has to be more forceful language and also the ability to meet with those Texas delegation. I don't think that the president has met with them. You know, the third thing I think is really going to be important is that this filibuster. We cannot avoid the elephant that is in the room. We cannot, on one hand, say, yes, we believe in voting rights, but two, we also uphold the very tool that has literally been weaponized against civil rights legislation historically in this country. And so we need to really, we're calling the question to President Biden, which side are you on? Because you can't serve two guys. On one end, right, if you're saying that you're fully around voting rights and you have to use every tool available to you, just as Johnson did in a very contentious environment, and we're not seeing that at the White House. So those are the three things. One, be able to have leadership around that he's willing to put aside or carve out the filibuster. Two, for the Senate to not go on recess and to reiterate that this is a key and central issue for his administration.
I think that I want to dial in on what LaTosha just said, Mark, in the sense that, you know, she's right. The president hasn't met with the Texas Democrats. I know that he has a busy schedule, but Mark, do you think that the Biden administration can be doing more out front? I think Kamala Harris is meeting, she met with the Texas Democrats, and she's taking many meetings with leaders, civil rights leaders, about voting. What do you think the president can be doing more of?
I want to level set. Because to fix the problems of the Voting Rights Act, we need the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. That bill has not been introduced. And the reason why it has not been introduced is because the Supreme Court has created a burden and a responsibility on the Congress to put together a detailed and extensive record to demonstrate why pre-clearance type provisions are necessary and needed to correct racial discrimination. So right now, we need both the For the People Act and the Voting Rights Advancement Act to fix, to thwart, to protect, to defend the right to vote. And we need voices and activism. But right now, the Senate could not vote on the Voting Rights Advancement Act because it has not yet been introduced. And I level set only because I don't support the notion of passing the For the People Act without the Voting Rights Advancement Act, because I think it would allow too many members of Congress to get off the hook. The Voting Rights Advancement Act, named after John Lewis, is the one that explicitly is about the 15th Amendment and defending and protecting against racial discrimination in voting. So the activism has to continue and elevate. And this issue is going to come to a more pointed head at some point after we get this Voting Rights Advancement Act both introduced and passed through the House. I agree fully with what LaTosha is saying. But I do want everyone to understand that we cannot allow the For the People Act to get separated from the Voting Rights Advancement Act. And I know this is, to some people, legislative minutia, but it's crucial that that our activism and the power of the activism of the 1960s is that it was continuous, it was consistent, it was peaceful, it was relentless, and it continued until we got the aims we want. And right now, we're going to have to continue this activism. We're going to have to make the D's. We're going to have to make the president. They have to respond, because if they do not respond effectively, it will be viewed by African-American voters as a betrayal of the commitment made when they took office earlier this year and why people went to the polls. Now, the other thing I'll say is this is so unsettling to me, because why has the Voting Rights Act been weakened? It's been weakened because of the Supreme Court of the United States. So the culprits in this are a court which saw fit to go in 50 years after this bill is passed and start interfering with it, start tinkering with it, start commenting on it. Second reason is, and the Texas legislators have demonstrated a lot of courage, this tsunami taking place in states all across the nation, which is all about sour grapes with the outcome of the election. So we're going to basically shut down the coalition that ousted us from power in the last election. So we've got a lot of work to do. We cannot get tired. We cannot get frustrated. It's going to take a long, long fight in order to do this. And I think that it will not happen without activism. It will not happen with smart, tactical, legislative, if you will, strategy as well. The two have to go hand in hand because this is crucial to the future of American democracy and also future to the commitments that many have made to racial justice. This is a third rail issue. This is a basic issue. This is a fundamental issue. And I think the fight has really just begun.
I mean, it's not a coincidence that the first state to pass a restrictive voting bill post 2020 was Georgia, because Georgia went blue, and they were like, "Oh snap, we can't have that." Black people and brown people are creating a coalition that's a majority? That's scary. Mark Morial and LaTosha Brown, thank you both for being here, and please stay safe.